Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. One thing that most of us don't do nearly often enough is to just plain laugh. They say that laughter is the best medicine, and I think that it really is. If you can find something to laugh about every single day, and I don't mean laughing at someone, I mean just finding a way to laugh at the little sillinesses of life, or if you can't find a way to laugh at yourself every day, then you aren't really trying. For example, everyone in my house, and that's my husband and me and my two adult children, each of us has our own Alexa. And Alexas you can really laugh at. But our Alexas turn our lights on and off. They run our shades up and down. They turn our fans on and off. They tell us the time and the weather and so on. And last week, out of the blue, my Alexa in my office went on strike. It just stopped working. My daughter, who is a software engineer by profession, and she's pretty high up in a pretty big company, she got it back to working. But then overnight, it stopped working again. She rebooted it the next morning, and then she said, I think that fixes it. And my Alexa started a conversation with her, which has never happened to me. She said, what is your name? Let's get to know one another. Now, to be clear, my Alexa has never wanted to know my name, and my daughter and I looked at one another and we burst out laughing. That darned Alexa still isn't working right, but at least we know what her problem was and why she went on strike. She just doesn't like me. She wishes that she was my daughter's Alexa. Now, if you can laugh at something like that, then everything is pretty much okay in your world, right? We still talk about that and we still giggle. Our guest today is a laughter expert. His name is Carl Unegbu, and he's a lawyer and a journalist based in New York City. Carl studied journalism at Columbia after graduating law school at the University of Miami. Prior to his admission to the New York bar, he practiced law in Miami and served as a law clerk at the International Court of Arbitration in Paris. He was a reporter at The Real Deal magazine before taking on editorship of ComedyBeat.com, and he's done articles for he writes well, I can tell because of his book, and no wonder his articles have appeared in a lot of magazines, and he also has hosted Comedy Dialogue, which is a quarterly series held in Manhattan's Upper West Side. It features stand-up comedy performances and panel discussions involving some of the comedy industry's best and brightest talents. And Carl Unegbu's book is a delight. I've almost finished reading it. It's called Comedy Goes to Court, When People Stop Laughing and Start Fighting. I thought that was a very intriguing title, and actually it's a very intriguing book. Carl, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's my honor to be able to join you.
I just think your book is so fascinating. It's in sections, and it's about all the different ways people get in trouble. And some of these are R-rated and some are X-rated. I mean, I couldn't, and there are a lot of famous people in this book, and usually their stuff isn't quite X-rated, but some of it's R-rated. And you talk about it all in a kind of very professional way. But let's just talk about some of these cases. It's fascinating. You're sort of a reporter on the comedy beat in New York and all over, really all over the world, but mostly all over the United States. Fascinating. Wait, what are some of the cases that most interested you that you kind of got involved in?
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is so wonderful that I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this book. Comedy Goes to Court. That's what it looks like when people stop laughing and start fighting. So as you could imagine from just listening to just hearing the title, at this, the story began with people trying to make others laugh, and then it ended up with, you know, people not being so happy anymore. They got in a fighting mood, and the rest is history from there. But so this book, I wrote the book for two reasons: one, to entertain, and the other to, I guess, teach a few things about like free speech and the First Amendment in our current time, the era, our current age, where we have cancel culture and woke ideology. In other words, how much protection does free speech still have in this kind of era? It's a very challenging environment. So that's the other reason why I wrote the book. But the first reason, well, and I don't know which one comes first, but both reasons are important. One, to entertain, and then to teach. So I chose to illustrate this book with life stories of some of the most famous and brilliant comedians out there that anybody would readily recognize. The adventures and misadventures and the shenanigans they got involved in, other things around, their lives, their work, and the reaction of the public to them. And, so all that kind of ecosystem wrapped up in one. So then I have, stories from comedians ranging from, Jerry Seinfeld, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, Jim Norton, Dave Chappelle, Michael Shea, Sacha Baron Cohen, Howard Stern, you just name it. David Letterman, I mean, they are all here. Bill Maher, John Oliver, I mean, everyone is covered here. And they have lots of interesting stories about them, their shenanigans, their adventures and misadventures, and then eventually how they got in trouble with the law and with other people, and how those things eventually, got resolved. So yeah, so there's a whole lot of stuff in here with respect to those kinds of activities.
This book could not be more timely because the Constitution and especially the amendments are all over the front page now.
Exactly.
I mean, the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the protections of the president, and why does he get to be protected when he does the things that he does when he's the president? Why should those be especially protected when he, is the president? And all these, I mean, my goodness, the Constitution is right on the front page every single day.
Yeah.
So your book is right front and center because of the Constitution and the protections that it gives us uniquely. If you say something and you're a comedian and you happen to say it in Canada or in France, you can go to jail.
Exactly.
If you're that exact same comedian and you happen to say it in the United States, you can say it.
Yep. And
I thought that was remarkable, and you laid that right out.
Yeah.
Why it came out this way, because he happened to say it in New York or in California.
Exactly. I mean, one of the main propositions of the book is that America is the best place by far that anybody could practice comedy here and not lose their shirt or lose their freedom. So, I mean, if you go to comparable Western democratic societies like Canada up north, you couldn't say some of the things that you could get away with saying here. For instance, I have a comedian there that I covered in this book, named Mike Ward, who attacked a kid who was disabled. The kid had what they call Treacher Collins syndrome, kind of disfigured his face. And
yes.
Made him look really funny. So, it was a very bad disease and kind of affected him in a very horrific way. But anyways, so at some point, he began to sing. Was a singer performing with Celine Dion. Then when Pope Benedict visited Montreal, he performed for the Pope. So, he was doing all of that. And then this comedian kind of I mean, it was clear to everybody that this kid had this condition. So, he was a disabled kid.
He's like
And then
13
he
or
was doing
something,
this,
I recall.
yeah, about 13, yeah. And he was doing this singing. So, he became sort of like a celebrity. People were fascinated that despite this disability, that he was able to do all that singing. So, yeah. So he became sort of like a minor celebrity. Well, a major celebrity, I would say. Now, this comedian, uh, he said, well, that he had been watching this thing from the sidelines, obviously. Then at some point, he got pissed off. He said, well, look, he thought that this kid was going to die because of his ailment, that, that he thought because everybody knew that the kid was going to die, that they were like humoring him, just, pretending to go along with his so-called singing. Now that some years have passed and this kid is still alive. So he said he thought that, okay, so that maybe this whole thing was a scam from the very beginning.
Well, I mean, I
This
thought that
may,
was all shabby on the part of the comedian.
yeah, well, he said he thought this one was a scam, that he wishes that the kid would die already, that he now feels scammed by this whole singing and everything. So, I mean, people laughed. He was doing his shows and taking on this kid. Folks were laughing heartily because, I mean, some people thought, okay, maybe this is kind of cruel, but, this was comedy. He was doing it. Now, this kid's family got aggrieved and they made a complaint to the Human Rights Commission in Quebec.
Quebec, yeah.
And then the Human Rights Commission eventually found that what this comedian did violated Canada's human rights law. And this comedian was liable to pay damages because he had affected this kid's dignity. He had attacked the dignity of this kid and, affected his self-confidence and things of that nature. So, yeah, so he was fined. Well, in this country, for instance, you couldn't fine a comedian. You couldn't impose any kind of punishment on a comedian for attacking somebody's dignity,
Right.
because we have this First Amendment where, you are allowed to swing your arms as wide as you can until you get to some, I guess, prohibitions against, let's say, incitement to violence.
Yeah, yeah. The First Amendment is so broad and so
Right.
deep. Right.
So it takes a long time before you can get to those ceilings where, like, you can, like, if you were inciting somebody to violence, the First Amendment will not protect you. Or if you were engaging in obscenity, the First Amendment would not protect you. Or if you say use what they call fighting words, then the First Amendment will not protect you. But these are very limited exceptions, which means before you can get to that place, you can do a lot of damage with respect to, if you like, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia. I mean, all these things are protected under the First Amendment in the United States.
That's right.
So unless you take things to the point where it becomes incitement to violence, then you're protected. If all you're doing is just saying something, attacking somebody's dignity, being homophobic, being anti-Semitic, being very racist, and whatever, Islamophobic, you'll be fine. But anyway, so that case in Canada, like, was one of the cases that show how different the First Amendment makes America, where you could do anything if you're literally anything. That if you lived even just up north in Canada, you could never try those things. And then if you come from like Germany, again, you have a problem too if you do some things that if you did them in this country, will be protected. Now, there was a comedian, Jan Böhmermann, that I cover in this book. So he attacked the president of Turkey, Erdogan, the Islamic country of Turkey.
Yeah.
He had said that Erdogan, he attacked Erdogan. He said Erdogan had sex with goats and watched child pornography.
Yeah, that was a little much. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he said the president of Turkey had sex with goats, right?
Goats,
He was in Germany,
sex with
right?
goats.
Don't do that. That's not a good thing to do, though.
So the Turkish foreign ministry, they took offense at that. They complained bitterly to the German government. They were calling for sanctions against this comedian. And for a while there, the comedian was investigated by the German government to see if he violated a law in Germany that makes it a crime to attack a foreign leader in that way. I mean, these are things you couldn't think about. You couldn't imagine those things happening in this country, the United States. You could do all of that, you'll be free, no problem. But if you try them in other societies that are comparable to ours with
Yes.
respect to the rule of law and
But they don't
democracy,
have
no,
the
you,
First Amendment.
yeah,
Right.
exactly, exactly. Again, that's the difference made by the intervention of the First Amendment here in the United States. Or if you come from like even England, for instance, in Scotland the other day, just last April, a new law came into effect, was called the Hate Crime and Public Order Law in Scotland, which says that if you store up hatred against any person based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, yeah, you could violate that law, and that could attract a lot of punishment to you, including perhaps up to 7 years imprisonment. Well, I mean, if you've been listening to the news lately, you might have heard how the writer, um, J.K. Rowling, how she's been like up in arms against them, how she like wanted to like make a test case of that law. So she went out there and said, well, no, she doesn't believe in transgender people, and then that became a problem under this law because the law says you can't even stir up hatred or provoke antipathy toward anybody based on sexual orientation. So yeah, so if you did that to transgender people, you'd be violating the law. So to make a test of the whole thing, she came out again, as she had been doing for a while. I mean, she had been canceled in a lot of places for her campaigns against transgender women, using the women's bathrooms. And, she's been trying to protect female spaces for biological
Right.
women.
Exactly. Right.
So she had been on that crusade for a while. So this law came in, and then she decided to test that law by holding her ground. She came out again and attacked transgender people. And then everybody expected her to get arrested under this law. So far, they have not done that. And then
Yeah.
that has kind of created a situation now where people are like, well, are you going to not go
She
after
said she would be
J.K.
proud to
Rowling?
go to prison.
Exactly, because she's a celebrity or no. So yeah, so the law is like it's been a subject of big debate in Scotland. But so that's the kind of environment you have in other societies that don't have the First Amendment.
Yes.
And so and Carnegie was one of the early targets of that law because part of the places where you could violate that law would be at public performances of a play or an event. And comedians, when they do shows, it's a public performance. Now, I'll give you an example, another example I cover in this book to dramatize this difference. Like Jay Leno, one time Jay Leno, and this was during the 2012 election, he was trying to dramatize how Republican candidates for president were so rich and so out of touch with the rest of the society. So he came to the point where he was talking about Mitt Romney's wealth. So when he talked about Mitt Romney, he showed the Golden Temple of Amritsar, a very majestic temple in India, something of very crucial religious and spiritual significance to the Sikh Indian community.
Yes.
Instead of to show Mitt Romney's home, vacation home in New Hampshire, he showed this Indian temple that was so majestic, as a way to like, dramatize the level of wealth Mitt Romney had that made him be out of touch with everyday people. Now, so some Indian American guy got so offended, a guy who was a member of the Sikh religion. He filed a lawsuit against Jay Leno, accusing him of racism, and that he was so insensitive to the Sikh religion, that he had defamed the religion by pretending that somebody who was not of the Sikh faith, namely Mitt Romney, that his home was actually the majestic temple, that kind of association. So he felt that, that was such a slur, an insult to the religion for him to associate someone like Mitt Romney, who was not a member of that religion, with that majestic temple.
Yeah.
So he filed a defamation lawsuit against Jay Leno. But then the big thing here was that the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they were bitter about the whole thing. So they complained to the U.S. State Department about Jay Leno's comedy, how this was such an insult to the Indian nation and, looking for sanctions. And the State Department came out and told them that, look, we don't endorse what Jay Leno was saying, but in this country, the United States, because of the First Amendment, there are people like Jay Leno and others who want to make jokes, that they are free to, make those kinds of
Right.
jokes, that the State Department cannot do anything to them, and that the State Department does not endorse, those jokes. They don't have one opinion or the other about it. In other words, if that would have happened in Canada, members of the government, institutions, and agencies of the government would actually attack you, like the Human Rights Commission or the Justice Ministry in Germany with the guy who insulted Erdogan. But in this country, the U.S. State Department told them that, look, our hands are tied. We can't really do anything. He's a comedian. The First Amendment, allows him to have that kind of right. So, that's sort of like a way to make a contrast between the United States and Canada and the First Amendment and other Western, societies where, that are Western societies that are also democratic, where the rule of law prevails.
It was such a great education, I thought, Carl, that your book was for people who don't respect the Constitution as much as they should. What a gift it is from our founding fathers.
You should thank your God that you're an American and that we have the First Amendment in this country. It should make every American proud, and hopefully we will never lose the protection of the Constitution and the First Amendment.
One of the signers said, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
Exactly.
That's true.
Exactly.
That's
pretty much what the State Department told the Indian government about Jay Leno. Said, look, we don't endorse what he said, but yeah, he has the right to do that in the United States.
It's wonderful. But there are other things in your book too, which I thought were great. I mean, I have to say there's a streak of genuine craziness in some of these comedians. They're lunatics. There's one guy who goes around with a skirt on and nothing underneath it. And then he's attacking people with what's under the skirt.
That's Andy Dick. So look, that's Andy Dick. I have him covered in this book. I think
they let
chapter
him
4.
keep doing this, and that's an act. That's a comedy act.
Yeah, it's comedy. It's comedy. Comedians like to be edgy. They like to break rules.
Right off the edge.
That's the game. I know that's the game. They like to be edgy and to break rules, and it's part of the appeal of comedians and things. So, but they tend to develop that kind of reputation that kind of glues their fans to them, and builds that kind of bond and loyalty and all that stuff. But this case was about Andy Dick, the comedian. He was doing a show in Texas. I think it was in Dallas, and then things got hot and heavy, and then he was performing. He was wearing a skirt. He was no underwear, but just a skirt and then a blouse. And then he was performing. Then at some point, he started to dance. And then people were applauding him and clapping. Then things got really hot and heavy. People got a bit carried away. So he came down on the stage and then was walking down the aisle. And then as he was passing, going toward the back of the hall, then somebody who was sitting by the side, a fan watching the show, stopped him to ask for like an autograph. So, Andy stopped and then looked at the guy. So, autograph? All right. So he grabbed the guy's head, pulled up his skirt and shoved the guy's head, into his bare crotch.
Why would people go to his show? I think
well, it's comedy. It's comedy. Well, so anyway, and then he moved on, continued to perform, and then people were laughing and everything. This guy got so embarrassed, the fan, and then he sues everybody he could think of, the comedy club, the promoters of the show, obviously, Andy Dick himself. Well, eventually, they're settled, but when I analyzed the law, I mean, the analysis of the law there was, because the questions that people kept asking me was, well, okay, so if he could, it's sort of like what you just asked. Why would they let him, the club, let him, do that, perform in that place, behave in that way? Well, why wasn't the club liable? Well, there wouldn't be because what he did was so like on this like so spur of the moment that the comedy club couldn't have predicted that he could do a thing like that. In other words, it just happened so fast. There was no way to say, well, they could have prevented that kind of behavior. So I mean, if they could have foreseen that kind of behavior, then they would have been under a duty, a legal duty to prevent that kind of thing from happening. But they couldn't have foreseen that. And if you look at the law, you are under no duty to prevent something that you could not foresee. If you're talking about negligence. Now, if it would have been like the difference would have been, say, a comedian finished performing and then somebody was going to a parking lot of the club to get into their car and they were mugged in the parking lot. Then, of course, you could sue the comedy club because they could have foreseen that kind of thing and taken steps to prevent people getting mugged in their parking lot, by providing adequate security and things like that. So there's a difference between what you could foresee and then prevent and what you couldn't foresee and thus cannot prevent. So what this comedian did was an intentional act. If it's an intentional act, you cannot hold somebody liable for somebody else's intentional act, especially if it's like assault. So yes, so eventually the person who was liable for that behavior was Andy Dick himself, but not the comedy club, for the reasons I just explained to you.
That's a kind of fine line.
They could not foresee what happened, and so they could not prevent it, and the law, therefore, did not impose any obligation upon them to have prevented
But there was another case which, if I'm reading it correctly, the comedian got so worked up, he took off all his clothes and attacked the audience.
Oh, yeah. That's a different comedian that I have in the book.
Backing up. But there was another, we have to start over. But there was another case near that where the comedian just got so excited he took off all his clothes and attacked his audience.
Right. It was a different comedian at a show in
a great
Oakland.
Comedian.
Yeah. That was Cat Williams, the comedian.
Right, Williams. Right.
Famous comedian. So in Oakland, he was doing a show in Oakland, and then at some point he got pissed off. I have him in this book on chapter 4, right next to the Andy Dick case. So he was performing this at this event, and then at some point, people like hecklers. Because when you do comedy, you have to deal with hecklers a lot of times. And some comedians have actually really gone overboard in dealing with hecklers. There was a time that the comedy legend, Richard Pryor, actually got so angry with the heckler that he went and stabbed the heckler with a fork.
I remember that story. Yeah.
So hecklers are a big problem in comedy. You've heard about hecklers attacking Jerry Seinfeld over the thing in Gaza. Hecklers are just an old problem in comedy. But anyways, in this case, there were hecklers who were taunting this comedian, Cat Williams. And then at some point he got so he couldn't take it anymore. So he took off his shirt.
Oh, I thought it said his clothes. And
then, he challenged them to a fight. There was commotion, and then things got so crazy. And then the show got disrupted. And then he was sued, for both himself and the promoters were sued for, people who were disappointed.
It was a class action suit, as I recall. Yeah.
It was a class action suit, yeah. So they said they didn't get the show they were promised, that this guy, he didn't give them enough time, that he cut the show even before he got to the middle of the thing. So, question was, who could get sued, who was liable, what could you do with the comedian? Was the comedian under an obligation to fully perform as promised? So, yeah, those were some of those issues. And then, what was the responsibility of the promoters of the show, to audience members that were caught up in this fight that this comedian started? So, yeah, it was, those are the kinds of things you encounter when you go to a comedy show. And, there are lots of questions about, well, okay, so if this happens, then what follows? What are the legal consequences? Who could go to court? Who could get sued? Who could recover money? So,
But it was
so it's one of those cases. But
in the law, I thought a pretty good one. A lot of case studies, because if anyone goes to law school, that's what you do. You study cases, and this is a whole bunch of cases.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You see, what one of the things that really amazed me was to discover just how much lawsuits comedians get involved with. I mean, you would think it's all fun and games. And frankly, when I went in to cover comedy, when I started out as editor, Comedy Beat, I was going there. We were going there to cover the fun and games of comedy. And lo and behold, we discovered this whole other thing that was going on, literally under the radar, that people did not even seem to notice, except the comedians who were involved in these lawsuits. How the thing became, a problem for them. But it was becoming clear that over the past 2.5 decades, you could date the phenomenon from 2000 coming to the present day. The lawsuits against comedians have exploded, and people start to wonder why is this situation happening? Well, I kind of theorized that it was because comedy today has become more important than it was previously. It has attained a larger footprint in the conversations going on in the pop culture and in the society more broadly. I mean, if you look at politics today, comedians play a huge role in the political arena with respect to who they attack, who they choose to make fun of, that sort of thing. And things have also become polarized between comedians on the left and those on the right. You see a comedian like Greg Gutfeld and his people, the MAGA sort of crowd. He presents a different comedy from comedians like, you know, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, comedians on the left of the political spectrum. So, there's this division. Everything today is polarized, including comedy. So comedians have become more of like major figures in politics today for that reason. Now they play for the team, so to speak. Gutfeld plays for his team, the MAGA people, supporters of Donald Trump, and the other people play for their team, people who are against Donald Trump. So yeah, so it's like this is where we are today. So comedy has become a lot more important uh, in the politics and culture of the country. So um, things like lawsuits have exploded too because now with them becoming more important and more serious players, they've come into a lot of money too. They make the kind of money that comedians even just a generation ago did not make.
Oh, some of them are
Because now
making
you're talking
big
about
dollars.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah, you're talking about arena comedy today, arena. Or if you have you go to Madison Square Garden, the Mohegan, comedians now play in those places, or the O2 Arena in Britain, London, or the Edinburgh Fringe. I mean, these are huge venues that, you know, uh, used to be the preserve of pop stars, rock stars, and things. Today, comedians have become like the new rock stars. So, so these things have created an environment where comedians now get sued because, in addition to those things they do, they also simply attack people in their comedy, and then they get sued a lot for maybe defamation and things like that, or other sort of situations, especially in today's times where we have cancel culture and woke ideology. The point being to protect people who are believed to be vulnerable in society. Let's say gay people, uh, Jews, or maybe transgender people. So Muslims, folks who are perceived to be vulnerable. That's the whole point of cancel culture. You have to be woke. You cannot be tolerated people don't want you to be cruel. So if you punch down, if you attack people they believe are vulnerable, let's say you attack rape victims or you attack gays and transgender people like Dave Chappelle has been doing. So yeah, they'll think you're punching down. If you're punching down, then it's not tolerated today in the woke America. You're supposed to be punching up at people of power. If you punch up at people like Donald Trump and other powerful people, yeah, audiences appreciate things like that than to punch down at disabled people, gay people, rape victims, so those kinds of things. So yeah, so today, because of the importance they have now in the pop culture, comedians have come into a lot of conflict with these cancel culture people because they say things. I mean, some comedians, like, again, they are edgy by reputation and aspiration. They like to be edgy. They like to break rules. And when you do these things, you don't have too much time to care about people who may have been historically, you know, oppressed, people who need protection in society today, like the cancel culture people and political correctness, the people they want you to respect. And so if comedians are edgy and they like to break rules, so they are not going to respect those kinds of boundaries. So the conflict between comedians and the cancel culture people and political correctness is inevitable. You know, once on one side, they want to protect these groups. On the other side, comedians don't care. They like to be edgy. They like to break rules. So they break those rules about who should not be attacked or who should be attacked. So yeah, so those conflicts are there. So apart from that, comedians also face a lot of pressure from, a not so obvious side, but it's there too. What they call strategic lawsuits against comedians, like the one I discussed in the book, where Donald Trump sues Bill Maher for $5 million. Over a joke Bill Maher made about, the color of Donald Trump's hair. He said Donald Trump, if Donald Trump could show him that he wasn't the son of an orange orangutan because of the color of his hair, that he would actually give him $5 million to give to any charity of his choice. And the backdrop of the story was, I don't know if you remember when Donald Trump was saying that Barack Obama wasn't born in this country. The birther thing. He said if Obama could show that he was born in this country, if he could produce his birth certificate, that he, Donald Trump, would give him $5 million. So Bill Maher goes on Jay Leno's show and he turns it around on Donald Trump. Say, well, if you could show that you're not the son of an orange orangutan because of the color of your hair, I'll give you $5 million. So people thought it was a joke, and people laughed at Donald Trump's expense. Now, I think a few weeks go by, Donald Trump surprisingly produces his birth certificate. I say, well, here's my birth certificate. I am a human being. I am not the son of an orange orangutan. So pay me $5 million. People attacked him, said, well, why are you doing this? This was just a joke. What are you trying to do? Are you attacking a comedian? And he pursued the case. Eventually, of course, he wasn't going to win. So he withdraws the case on April Fool's Day, 2003. But, that was the point was he wasn't expecting to win so much as to teach Bill Maher a lesson, to drag him, around, rake him over the coals, drag him into court, make him spend money, teach him not to mess with the wrong Marine, that kind of thing. So, that kind of strategic attack happens. And the same thing happened to John Oliver. The next case I have in the book, where John Oliver, he was talking about, this was the first year of the Trump administration in 2017. So Oliver was criticizing the Trump administration, their policies toward coal, the coal industry. He thought that they were being so nice and so friendly with the coal industry, that they are ignoring mine safety regulations and things of that nature. Yeah. So Oliver attacked a billionaire named Robert Murray, the gentleman who owned the largest coal company in America, right. Murray Energy. So Oliver said, well, the guy was not being sincere. He was undermining. And this guy was an ally of Donald Trump, very big ally of Donald Trump, who had testified in Congress, in defense of coal industry and things. So Oliver attacked him in general, his politics and everything, and then his personality too. Like the guy was a geriatric Dr. Evil. He looked old and ugly, whatever. He attacked him just roundly.
But didn't someone die in his coal mine, that fellow?
Well, that's the thing. So Oliver, there was to make his point that this guy was playing fast and loose with coal industry regulations. Oliver cited a situation in 2007 where there was an explosion at the mine in Utah, owned by this billionaire, his company. And then about 9 people died in that explosion. Yeah. So there was some controversy over what caused that explosion. So the billionaire and his company, they tried to say it was an earthquake that caused the explosion. Then Oliver said no, that it was actually their failure to adhere to mine safety regulations that caused the earthquake. And Oliver cited a government report that said it was their failure to adhere to mine safety regulations that caused the earthquake. So, there was that whole thing. Well, so before the show ran, this billionaire they told John Oliver to cease and desist. They sent him a cease and desist letter. So, well, you can't run this episode. If you run the episode, we are going to see you for defamation. These things are false. You can't run them. So Oliver, Oliver being Oliver, he came to his show the week before he ran the episode. He said that he had been told that by some billionaire that the episode he's going to run was a defamation, that they have threatened to sue him, that he's going to run the thing anyway, that he's daring them to sue him. So he ran the episode the following week. And then expectedly, these are billionaires, they don't play around. They have money. So he sues John Oliver. They were based in Ohio, but they sued him in West Virginia, coal country, for defamation, all that stuff, that sort of stuff. Anyway, but eventually, though, Oliver wins the lawsuit, because, this is a comedian. Usually the courts will tell you, well, look, he's a comedian, he's making a joke, it's not a statement of, all that stuff. Then there's the First Amendment. So, but the point is, after winning the lawsuit very early, it was dismissed early. But by then, Oliver had spent over $200,000 on lawyers' fees. And his insurance on his show, his liability insurance on his show, went up, skyrocketed by more than 300%. So that was like the point, to make an example of Oliver. It's a strategic lawsuit, the very sort that Donald Trump had filed against BMR. So, these are some of the challenges comedians face, even though, again, thanks to the First Amendment, usually they win these lawsuits. But that's not the point. For some people who want to teach them a lesson, they make you spend money. So those are the only challenges you're going to have here. It's not the government that's attacking you now, but it's either billionaires like Donald Trump and Robert Murray, or maybe the cancel culture people who might want to cancel you and not go to your show anymore. Because look, the law may be able to protect you from liability, but the law cannot force anybody to go and watch your show.
Yeah, and it's just, I think that comedy can thrive in the United States because of the First Amendment, but
Absolutely.
it also, because of the First Amendment, I think it helps to sort of goose up the fighting, the political fighting in this country, because they don't mind what they say to one another, because they know that nobody can tell them you can't say that, because you can say that almost anything.
Exactly.
You can.
So in this country, you have, I guess, you have two courts, parallel courts. There's the court of law, where if you're a comedian, you can say so much and get away with it.
You're a politician, you could say it too.
Exactly.
I'm so sorry to say this. We really have been running over time, where this goes so fast. It always does. We get so involved in talking, but we really have come to the end of our time. This has been very enjoyable.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I think it's been very educational too. I so appreciate, your stuff cold. And I think your book is simply great. Thank you so much for being with us. What do you want people to take away from what we've been saying today?
Wonderful. So I want them to take away two things. One of the reviewers of this book had said that if you're a major comedian and your name is not in this book, that somehow you are not important in comedy. But I wouldn't go so far to say that, except to say that if you're a major comedian and you have not been covered in a book like this one, then you've been very lucky, I guess, not to have been sued up until now, because the suits are like rampant. Americans are like addicted to lawsuits. And so one of the reviewers,
that's right.
Yeah, addicted to lawsuits. Americans will literally sue anything that moves. So one of the reviewers said that, look, this book is a must read for comedians, and they should read for the rest of the people. Now, I wrote the book for two reasons. One, to provide entertainment, like I said, lots of titillating stories and all that. And one major comedy industry veteran, he has said that stand-up comedy is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So in that spirit, so the book is a book that's written to entertain people. It's written in very simple language, the kind of language you could see in People magazine or the world famous page 6 of the New York Post. So it's very easy read.
Very
So I
easy.
want people to lose themselves in the book. And when you lose yourself in the book, to get the feeling that maybe you're watching a comedy special on Netflix or Comedy Central, watching a roast or being at a comedy club. So yeah, it's a book you can take on vacation, read on a beach, on a couch, any place where you read books. Yeah. So it's such a relaxing read. So for that reason, that's one of the first reasons I wrote the book, to entertain. Then the other one is to educate about the First Amendment. In other words, comedians today have arrived at the front lines of the Fourth Amendment, all the battles over free speech. So in that sense, comedians have become like our canary in the mine, our dog in the fight. Whatever happens to them happens to the rest of us. Like you have said, the politicians and the comedians, the comedians have the same rights as the rest of us. They don't have more rights than any of us. They have the same rights as the rest of us. But because they talk for a living and offend people, so what they do gives us a chance to see the boundaries of the free speech and the First Amendment, because they get sued and they get in trouble. So when it happens to them, it gives us a chance to see what the First Amendment still means in America today and how much we can get away with saying or not saying. So that's the spirit, the other spirit in which I wrote the book, and then of course there is a whole thing about comedians and the rest of us. Stories I have in the book about, like a British woman who, was going through a divorce with her ex, and she was saying, well, look, you can't talk about our marriage in your comedy. He said, no, I've been dying for 2 years to talk about this marriage on stage. So I can't, I'm not gonna sign this where I say I can't talk about the marriage. Or the comedian who, the other guy I have here, who is actually a judge in a courtroom. He moonlights as a judge. When he moonlights, he keeps talking about how he doesn't like children, talking about national origin, all sorts of stuff that some people felt, okay, look, if I went to this guy's courtroom, he might not be fair to me. And they tried to kick him off the bench, make him stop being a judge. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of New Jersey. I'm not going to say how it ended, but people might have to read the book to find out. But so comedians have a lot of interactions with the rest of us. I mean, a lot of times we don't choose the interaction. Sometimes we do. I mean, if you marry a comedian, it's not like being married to a doctor or being married to a lawyer. But then again, sometimes a comedian is a judge in a courtroom you're appearing in. So there are lots of circumstances in which we encounter comedians, not necessarily at a comedy show, but sometimes, in daily life. So this book covers a whole bunch of stuff, runs the entire gamut, talks about, so there are so many stories here that offer teachable moments about life in society, just beyond comedy. So, it has become, yeah, so the book becomes like a should read for the rest of us who believe in a free society and want to understand our rights. And then it's a must read for comedians. So, for everybody, there is something in the book. And so I wrote the book in that spirit, to entertain and to teach.
To teach. Well, it certainly does do that. Well, consider yourself hugged, my dear. And
Oh, thanks. Appreciate
stick
that.
with me to the
And
end. I just have a few things to say to my regular listeners. I'll be back.
okay, sure.
So, everyone, once again, we've come to the end of our time. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm so happy you could be with us today. And please never forget, you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began and you never will end. And when you get that, and when you know all its implications, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Brenda Wright, who will be with us for the 5th time. Brenda is Seek Reality's own special guru of gratitude. In her successful coaching practice, she guides people through a 5-step forgiveness process that's easy to understand and to learn. She says that self-forgiveness originally helped her to transition out of victimhood and into the life that she was meant to live. And it can do the same for you. She has written a nifty little book called Forgive Yourself. It's short, it's easy to understand, and I think everyone should read it. The first thing we have to understand is that the people who wrong us couldn't care less whether we ever forgive them. No, forgiving ourselves is the gift that we give to ourselves. And forgiving ourselves is the easiest thing to do of all, and the best self-forgiveness gift of all. Please, Brenda is always a wonderful guest, so be sure to join us next week. And this week, our guest has been Carl Unegbu. Carl is a lawyer, a journalist. He's giving you another glimpse of his book. I only got the interior, so I never got to see the cover. Carl is a lawyer, a journalist, and a comedian, and that's an unusual combination. He beats me because I'm just a lawyer, a writer, and an afterlife and gospels expert. He's written a very enjoyable book, Comedy Goes to Court, when people stop laughing and start fighting, and some of these people really fought physically. What happens when the laughing stops? Well, some interesting things. But what I most got out of that book is, wow, I'm glad I'm an American, because the First Amendment is like iron. It's like steel. You've seen just over the past few weeks what the Supreme Court does for us. And most of all, what it does is enforce that Constitution, which is your big protection against anything that can take away your right to say what you want to say, and nobody can take that right away from you. Be glad you're an American if you're an American hearing this. And if you're not, there's still time. You can get here. And apparently they're letting anybody in now. So good luck to you in getting here in time. You'll learn a lot from this book. And most of all, you're going to enjoy it. It's a lot of vignettes and a lot of famous names in there. So, I mean, I certainly enjoyed it. I hurried to finish it before I got to talk to Carl. As you know, our great friend Craig Hogan is the president of Seek Reality Online, and that's your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality really is eternal, and it's not optional. You're going to get there whether you want to or not, so you may as well learn what's coming next. Teachings by Jesus is your single resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher of them all, Master Jesus. He didn't start the Christianity we have now. He started something much more wonderful. And now that what we have now is dying, it's what was given to us by a Roman emperor. Now it really is Jesus's turn. So go to teachingsbyjesus.com and learn about the beautiful things that are coming next. And as you know, I have some wonderful books that I've written, actually, that Thomas has helped me write, but no time to talk about them now. And if you want to talk about anything at all with me, just go to the green contact block on robertagrimes.com and get my contact information and just send me an email. I answer all my emails, even though sometimes it takes a while. And meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being. And most of all, in this entire universe, you are infinitely, eternally, and perfectly loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.